go to Delegate Anderson's 1185 and Delegate Moon's 1236. We're going to take them both at the same time. Both of them at the same time.
Liberty.
Wait a minute. Does Delegate Barron have another bill? Oh, no, that's right. How about it?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Madam Vice Chair, and all my friends on the Judiciary Committee. I hope everybody is awake and alive and ready to go, because I got something that will calm you down. I got something that will seriously take the edge off of what's been happening tonight. Okay? This is the bill that you guys have been looking for the session. Back in the 1940s and the 1950s, there was a trailer, and most of you are too young to remember this, but in the movies you would have a lot of little short subjects before the full movie came on. Sometimes they were animated, sometimes they were funny, sometimes they were informative. And the Hearst Corporation took advantage of this idea and created a little short subject called Reefer Madness. And it basically touted how bad smoking marijuana could be for you, and created this little show about some young lady going completely mad because she had smoked marijuana. Of course, nothing in that was true, but because William Randolph Hearst and the Hearst Corporation had the money to run it in theaters and then place ads in newspaper for many years through the 1940s and the 1950s, it became part of the American ethos that marijuana somehow was associated with this reefer madness. And nothing could be further from the truth. But the real motivation behind Hearst putting these in his newspapers and the trailer was that he and Hearst Corporation own millions of dollars worth of timberland in the Northwest. And at the time, industrial hemp was in competition with wood to be used for paper fabrics. And he wanted to put the kibosh on that, and he certainly did. Marijuana was legal in the United States, I guess, up until 1920. What year was it? 1924 or in the 1930s, until Congress outlawed it. But they didn't really do it as a result of any testimony that showed it was dangerous. It was just part of what was ongoing at that time. This bill basically takes away criminal penalties for the personal use of marijuana. Currently, we have a law in effect that if you possess less than 10 grams of marijuana, you can only get a civil citation. This bill would change that particular part of the law to say that a person could have and possess up to an ounce of marijuana without being criminally responsible, civilly responsible in any way. The bill also, though, sets up a very sophisticated network of growers, retailers, taxing structures to support Maryland's economy, similar to what's going on in many other states in this country. I introduced this bill for the first time about 4 or 5 years ago, and I remember the poll in Maryland at the time showed that almost a third of all Marylanders were in favor of legalizing marijuana. And I had 2 co-sponsors, and we talked about the bill, and a lot of folks came and heard testimony. The years have passed. Oh, and by the way, at that time, only one state was considering legalizing marijuana, and that was Colorado. Since that time, more than 8 states now have legalized personal use marijuana. Colorado now has almost a 4-year history of what happens once it's done in the state, not just the effect or impact upon the juvenile use or driving under the influence of drugs, but also the revenues that can be gained by the taxation and of the sale of this product, both in a form that can be smoked or eaten. What do we call it? You eat it? Edible, of course. But it's just remarkable that even since then, the percentage of people in the state of Maryland at the time was around 33%. The poll about 2 weeks ago, was it the Goucher poll?
Yeah.
Okay. A Goucher poll came out and showed that now 58% of Marylanders currently believe that it's time for a bill to pass regarding the legalization of personal use marijuana. So we have got a couple of ways to deal with this. The bill I'm talking about, and then Delegate Moon has another bill that I think can coexist and maybe even have to be conjoined if his bill were to pass. So with that, I just pass it over to my colleague from Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Chairman Anderson.
Chairman Anderson, my bad. And I'll piggyback off of what my colleague here has to say with a little modernization of this reefer madness story, which is that it appears that opioid manufacturers do some financing of anti-marijuana initiatives in various states. So that whole story with the timber or whatever it is you're talking about has not ended. So HB 1236 is a stupid simple bill. It would basically take the issue of taxing and regulating marijuana like alcohol and putting it to a vote at the next regularly scheduled election. The mechanism it would do this is by making this a constitutional amendment. And I modeled this bill after how we moved gambling in Maryland, which is to say we put a very simple ballot question up saying yes or no, and then directed the legislature to adopt later the scheme for regulating that activity. So if you take a look at the bill, it doesn't really say much except that the use and possession and cultivation of cannabis would be legal. This is the question that would be put in front of the voters. And the only 2 points of specificity I put in here, and again, I'm trying to keep a very simple question for the ballot, is what to use these funds for, and some other things saying that this does not apply to driving laws or public smoking laws and things like that we already have on the books. But the funding part here is the important part to me because as you take a look at the list of items that I've stuck into this ballot question, the money would be used for education, public schools, substance abuse treatment, recidivism, and mental health services. And the reason it's phrased this way is because, as far as I can tell, we've had decades and decades of a failed prohibition policy. And when you look at some of the other bills that I've put in, trying to get people to be allowed to expunge their record of simple marijuana possession charges and things like that, we now have thousands and thousands and thousands of Maryland residents who have a criminal record impacting their employment, their housing, their student loan eligibility, and all of this all over the state because of marijuana. And that continues to be an issue, so I think it's only fair that if we move to legalization, some of that money ought to be earmarked for reentry services. And frankly, we talk a good game about the opioid epidemic, but I have yet to see some meaningful funding increase that would actually allow us to do what we say we want to do to address that. So as far as I'm concerned, this bill would have us use marijuana to fight heroin and other opioids. So I will leave it at that, but direct you to 2 handouts that I have provided here. One of them has a list of the 9 states, including District of Columbia, which have now approved marijuana legalization at the ballot. The other one is a poll from the Washington Post and University of Maryland from last fall of 2016. The Post originally published the results of their poll online with just some top lines showing like, oh, near 60% of Marylanders now favor legalization. But I actually reached out to the team that conducted this poll and asked if they could dig a little deeper and give us some crosstabs showing support around different parts of the state, as well as by political party and things like that. And what you will find might surprise you. Support for legalization is pretty uniform around the state. In fact, the top support is from Anne Arundel and Howard counties, if that might surprise you. So I would encourage you to take a look at this. Support is strong across all parties, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. And I think what this all says is, just as we've seen with other issues, the public is ahead of this body on this issue, and it is now incumbent upon us to catch up. And so my colleague here, Mr. Chairman Anderson, has legislation that would directly implement legalization through the code, and my bill here is a little bit of a dodge because it allows us to simply put it on the ballot without making a comment on the substance of that. And I can tell you from my private conversations with our colleagues, there is a great deal of interest in this referendum vehicle for moving this discussion along. And I would say there's interest from Republicans and Democrats alike. And you would be surprised, since news of this effort has spread in Maryland, how many of your aides and lobbyists and advocates down here have poked me, with their elbow and said, I hope this thing starts moving. But it's not surprising to me because the last poll I saw on this topic had fully 50% of Marylanders admitting that they've smoked marijuana at some point in their life. So either they got away with a jailable crime that we think should stay on the books, or something's wrong with the system and we need to fix it. So thank you very much, and I hope you will consider this.
Good evening, Chairman and members of this committee. My name is Kate Bell. I am with the Marijuana Policy Project. I'm also a Maryland attorney. And I want to answer the question, why should we do this now, this session? Because the sooner that this reform happens, the sooner we stop arresting people, disproportionately people of color in this state, and all of the collateral consequences that come along with that. Because the sooner that this reform passes, the sooner that the state can benefit. Colorado made $200 million last year. And there are 30,000 people who are actively registered to work in the industry in Colorado. That's just the people handling the cannabis, not all of the ancillary businesses and economic benefits and tourism as well. Because, people ask, well, the medical program is delayed. Why should we do this now? Well, because the fact that there's been issues with that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start this process now. By the time this gets up and running, medical businesses will already be open, and patients will benefit from this because it will dramatically reduce prices for people that are on fixed incomes. Also, not all patients are going to be signed up in the program because they're worried about being on a government list. I wanted to touch on the federal issue. I know there's been some rumblings from Mr. Spicer about this, but I wanted to point out to you all that the Cole Memorandum, which lays out the federal enforcement priorities in this area, is still in place. The Rohrabacher Amendment, which defunds federal enforcement of the laws in the medical program, is still in place. Through late April, we expect to not only extend that, but to pass McClintock-Polis as well, which would defund federal enforcement of with respect to any state legal businesses. And you've already heard about the polling. I would urge you not to let the Trump administration set policies for the state of Maryland, but rather to listen to the views of your own constituents. And the last thing I wanted to say is that we looked long and hard at what happened with the licensing in the medical industry, and there are a lot of provisions in this bill to ensure that this licensing process is diverse and equitable from the beginning, and I would be happy to address that if there's any questions. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the House. I admire your work, and I thank you for all of it. My name is Fernando Wagner. I'm a scientist who has published research on the early stages of drug involvement and public health since the 1980s. I was trained at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health as an addiction specialist. My primary interest has been to help children and youth stay away from any substance that has any addictive properties. I'm a full professor at the School of Community Health and Policy at Morgan State University. One of the concerns that often surfaces in discussions about marijuana is that this is a gateway drug, that it's formulated as a gateway model, which was described by Denise Candel and other colleagues early in the 1970s, and it describes a progression from tobacco and alcohol use to marijuana use, followed by other illegal drug use, and ending with drugs that are with medical benefits. But the fallacy of the model is that it fails to realize that most of the people will not progress to using any other drugs. In fact, most people never progress to use marijuana and other drugs, of those who use alcohol and tobacco. Those who try marijuana do not necessarily progress to other drugs or become persistent users. There are about 120 million people who have used marijuana in the United States, and about 1.6% have developed a cannabis use disorder. That compares to the 4 times higher rate for alcohol problems. Now, what I would like to say is that 80% of medical cannabis patients use daily without having cannabis use disorders, according to a report to the National Advisory Council on Drug Abuse by Dr. Marcia Lopez. May I finish with this, please? Thank you. The other point I wanted to make is that those who use marijuana are less likely to use prescription opioids extramedically, as reported by the Institute of Medicine. In fact, a recent study published in the Drug and Alcohol Dependence Journal shows that states with medical marijuana programs have lower impact of the opioid epidemics. So finally, lack of access to affordable treatment is one of the important barriers for helping people. Regulating and taxing cannabis will help fund treatment resources as well as public health interventions to minimize risks, especially among the most vulnerable populations. And I am with the 64% of Maryland voters who support marijuana cannabis legal for adults. The bill is very well thought, uses the experience gained in other several states that have already benefited from taxing and regulating cannabis. Thank you very much, and I would like to happen this in my state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Delegate, or should I call you Chairman Moon, since you're Chairman of the subcommittee also? I just a question about your math. Under your bill, indicates constitutional right to use cannabis, possess up to 2 ounces of cannabis at any one time, and to cultivate up to 6 cannabis plants at any one time. Now, back when I was at the task force, just a moderately successful one cannabis plant being grown could produce 8 ounces to a pound of marijuana. I'm just trying to figure out how can you produce 6, could be up to 6 pounds, but you're only allowed to possess 2 ounces.
That number comes from D.C., where three mature plants and 3 unmature plants. But, again, this is a starting point. If you want to nudge these numbers around, I'm happy to talk.
I just don't want you to run afoul. That's all.
Yeah, gotcha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Delegate Anderson or Delegate Moon, do you agree?
Will this be a joint question?
Sure. I want you both to answer this doobie of a question. Do you agree that we have a drug problem in Maryland?
Yes.
Okay. And Delegate Moon? Yes or no?
Well, that's a pretty vague question. You
No,
can include alcohol,
it's not. It's pretty
Just
open.
say yes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. We have a lot of federal jobs in the state. In fact, I would say, what, the majority of our economy is the federal government, correct?
Not the majority, but we have a
Well, I
lot
know
of federal jobs.
I know in St.
Why don't you just ask the question so we can get on with it?
Well, down in St. Mary's, it's like 82% of our economy is federal jobs.
Okay.
So at the federal level, you know, you're prohibited from using marijuana. I mean, marijuana is still legal at the federal level. And if you use it, you can't get hired by the federal government. So how do we square that up?
Well, let me just say that Washington, D.C., where marijuana was legalized, basically has way more federal jobs than you have in St. Mary's County. And they seem to be doing okay with that conflict. In other words, most of the laws, most of the language that we're using is patterned after D.C. because we don't want to be too askew from them in terms of differences. So, yeah, marijuana is legal in Washington, D.C., and there are a lot of federal jobs there, and it doesn't seem to be a problem.
Well, it would be a huge problem down in St. Mary's because our federal jobs are military.
The other thing I would say about it is,
you're going to increase our unemployment rate with this. So, Delegate Moon,
hold on,
fund rehab when you're making the drug legal?
Let me address that.
No, I'm
point
good
about
with
the
Delegate
age
Anderson's question.
I'm sorry.
Or answer. So, Delegate Moon, why fund rehab when you're making the drug legal?
Why fund? Well, we have a huge need for addiction beds in this state, and again, this is steering our drug policy towards actual evidence. I mean, if you look in your packet here, you'll see a letter from some firefighters in here indicating that they've never once in their dispatches had a call for overdose of marijuana come in their decades of career here. So, yeah, I think it's entirely appropriate to take revenue. I mean, look, the alternative is this money goes to the school system or the general fund. We have chronic underfunding of mental health and substance abuse in this state. This is a new revenue stream, somewhere between $50 and $200 million. I don't see any other new revenue streams coming online in the middle of our billion-dollar budget shortfall coming up. So again, if we're serious that these are issues that we want to tackle, you need a revenue source for them. Otherwise, we're just squeezing the balloon to pull it from somewhere else.
No, if
we are moving into a posture of legalizing cannabis, it seems entirely appropriate to divert that funding stream to chronic underfunding of substance abuse treatment in this state, especially for substances that have a far more serious risk of overdose, fatal overdose. And so, I mean, if you think that's a problem, I'd be happy to consider taking that part out, but I don't see the logic of that.
Well, Delegate, if we were serious about our budget shortfalls, we'd stop spending. Isn't that so?
Well, that's a different bill.
And then, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. First, let me preface this by saying I wish Congress would pass this tomorrow and then would take all the problems that I have with this out of it. Okay. So I have two issues, and I'm going to address the two delegates because we had a bill in here the other day that addressed my first issue, and that's testing to try to figure out, whether or not somebody is driving under the influence. And both of you were pretty much adamantly questioning why we should do something like that. So that's my first concern is there a test that can be proven that shows somebody is doing this while, driving?
Well, a blood test can show whether or not you've consumed marijuana, and sometimes, as they say, it stays in your system up to 30 days. The problem is there a test to show whether or not it has any impact on your ability to drive,
Correct.
whether it impairs you or whether you're so much under the influence that you're driving in a reckless manner? Obviously, if there were evidence to show that the person was zigzagging or had an accident and all these other things, and then you bring a DRE in and talk to the person, that person makes his or her recommendation, and then a blood test is done, you could use the results of the blood test to say, by the way, in addition to all these other things, all this evidence of how reckless the person was driving, he had marijuana in his system. It would be then up to the trier of fact, either the judge or the jury, to make a determination if he's guilty of our drunk or drugged driving laws.
Right. So, yes, I got that, but I still am a little nervous about, lawyers trying to get off on technicalities. My second concern, and this is where I'm really, the driving's not as big, but the second concern is about the banks. Our banks in this country are FDIC insured, and I know in Colorado they're having problems with the money. So can you assure me that the federal government is not going to come in here and take money out of our banks that'll cause us, banks to not want to do business in this state? So,
I'll happily answer that. So, the Treasury Department is also operating under the Cole Memorandum, which is the
right. But Colorado's banks do not. They're not. These people are holding cash because they're afraid.
I can tell you a couple of responses to that. One is that there is not evidence that there has been any more crime around medical businesses in Colorado than any other type of business.
I'm not worried about crime. I'm worried about the money being put into banks versus being stacked in buildings because they're afraid to put it in the banks.
Well, I can tell you that in D.C., if you talk to the folks that are operating lawful businesses there, which are medical, but as far as the federal government is concerned, all marijuana is illegal, so it's actually not relevant whether it's medical or adult use. They are banked. If you talk to the business owners, they will tell you that they have to pay a bunch of extra fees. They have to do a bunch of extra paperwork. They're not thrilled about it, but they are banked. FINRA put out new guidance on this recently. And they'll actually tell you that in some cases their banks inspect them more than the actual regulators do. They have to provide all of their books to the banking officials as well. I will tell you that the National Cannabis Industry Association is working hard on this issue in Congress to make things easier to deal with that issue, but
they should work to pass it in Congress so that we don't have these sticky issues in our state.
We are.
Because, like I said, I wish it was passed tomorrow. I just have some concerns with a couple things, and that's my problem. Is until these are worked out, I got to figure out how to vote on this.
I would say also that problem is an existing problem with our medical operation, which is just about to launch.
Yeah, I wasn't here and I didn't vote on that, so. Don't think because my father voted for it means I would support something like that too. So thank you.
He didn't vote for it.
Yes, he did. He voted for medical marijuana. So
did he?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
The apple don't fall far from the tree. Oh, another panel.
He wants us out.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Bill Pitcher. I'm here representing the Marijuana Policy Project on House Bill 1185, in favor of House Bill 1185. Just want to make a couple of quick points. Number one of the things that I am an attorney by trade, but I'm an amateur historian, and I've studied the prohibition that was repealed in the 30s. And just like then, I mean almost verbatim, just like then, and a lot of the facts, it didn't work then, and it's failing now. This is this prohibition that we have here now. We're spending billions of dollars trying to keep people from participating in something that they obviously want to do. You've heard the polls, and now we're also creating a class of people who are getting arrested for something like this that we really should be addressing. The recent Gallup poll that wasn't mentioned earlier was that over 44% of Americans admitted to having tried it. Times are changing. This is a movement that you have to start to recognize, and that's what happened in the 30s, and I would refer you to that. The other point that I wanted to make is that today we have the luxury of having a couple of really good examples to look at. Almost 5 years ago, both Colorado and Washington legalized marijuana. The governor of Washington, together with the Attorney General in Washington, recently wrote, and I just wanted to read this one sentence from their letter, one paragraph. Our state's efforts to regulate the sale of marijuana are succeeding. A few years ago, the illegal trafficking of marijuana lined the pockets of criminals everywhere. Now, in our state, illegal trafficking activity is being displaced by a closely regulated marijuana industry that pays hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. This frees up significant law enforcement resources. The same thing from Governor Hickenlooper in Colorado, who strongly opposed legalization in Colorado, now says things in Colorado have gone well, and he cites that health officials have not seen increased teen use or dramatic increase in overall consumption. So for those reasons, we would hope that you would give the bill a favorable report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Dan Formansky here representing the Marijuana Policy Project in support of House Bill 1185. 3 points I wanted to make. The first is we've talked a little bit about the businesses and that would be regulated under this bill. So we've got cultivation, production, distribution, sales, and testing is a very important one that I just wanted to reference because testing brings control and regulation to a currently completely unregulated and untaxed underground market. And this is important because this means there'll be quality control testing, and that will help deal with possible contamination by fertilizers, pesticides, mold, bacteria, or the lacing of cannabis with other drugs, which I know is a concern that's been raised. And all of these are unnecessarily putting consumers at risk. And the other thing that we'll be testing for would be purity. And so this is important because we know that the sales of cannabis are happening. They will continue to happen. And illegal cannabis sales are generally, much of it is coming from cartels. And so there is no testing happening there. There is no knowledge about what you're getting. And so that is both a safety issue. It's also a consumer right to know issue. And a lot of individuals who do choose as adults to consume cannabis would like to know the potency of what it is they're getting. Second point is that replacing prohibition with sensible regulation would be better for workers. So as decades of prohibition have shown us, individuals will continue to produce and sell cannabis, whether it's illegal or illegal. But in the underground market, these workers have no basic protections. They're vulnerable to exploitation and violence. And of course, they're at risk for felony convictions and prison time. So a regulated market is going to offer important protections from health and safety protections to unemployment insurance and Social Security, and all of the advantages that go along with working in a legal industry instead of the underground market. And third, while cannabis is not a completely harmless drug, the health and safety implications of cannabis consumption pale in comparison to those that are associated with alcohol and tobacco. And just one point I'll make, that alcohol is known to contribute to aggressive behavior, while marijuana does not. An article in the Journal of Addictive Behaviors reported, quote, alcohol is clearly the drug with the most evidence to support a direct intoxication-violence relationship, while cannabis reduces the likelihood of violence during intoxication. So 3 reasons why we support House Bill 1185. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, my name is Rochelle Young, and I'm here today on behalf of the ACLU of Maryland in support of HB 1185 as well as HB 1236. So as this committee knows, and I know you know because I keep telling you, the war on marijuana has disproportionately harmed people of color. Despite similar rates of use across all races, African Americans in Maryland are nearly 3 times as likely to be arrested for the simple possession of marijuana as their white neighbors. This is the case across in every county in the state, and regardless of whether the county is majority black or majority white. For example, in Baltimore City, which is 64% black in its population, arrest rates for marijuana are 91% black. In Montgomery County, it's 18% black for the population, and 46% of the arrest rates are for African Americans. Similarly, in PG County, for example, African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be arrested than their white neighbors. In Garrett County, that increases to 6.5%. Of course, criminal records, the harm of criminal records endure far beyond the arrest itself and carry collateral consequences such as interfering with the ability to obtain a job, professional licensing, higher education, and even housing in some circumstances. So these also disproportionately harm communities of color. In 2014, this committee recognized the need to address these racial disparities, as did the General Assembly, and you all passed a bill to decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana. That alone has not been enough. We're now hearing that law enforcement officers are circumventing the intent of that law by overcharging people in possession of less than 10 grams if, for example, that marijuana is split up into several joints. They're being charged with intent to distribute, and if the cannabis is in the form of extracts, oils, then they're being overcharged with in possession of a dangerous controlled substance, which of course marijuana no longer falls into that category, so it's a waste of judicial resources when they go to trial, and that specific charge has to be dismissed because marijuana is no longer categorized as under that offense. So for these reasons, the ACLU of Maryland urges you to issue a favorable report on HB 1185 and HB 1236.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Mike Rothman. I am here on behalf of Normal. Paul Armentano, who is the deputy director there, had provided some testimony, which you have before you. This is in support of HB 1236 and HB 1185. His testimony mainly deals with the issue of driving, the one that Delegate Cluster had discussed previously. What's important to note about this issue is the statistics do not bear out the fear that has been waged on behalf of this issue. There's some very telling statistics that are in this testimony that I think it would be important for you all to know. One thing that's very important, in 2015, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration came out with a study on impaired driving, on the driving under the influence of drugs issue, specifically regarding marijuana, cannabis intoxication while driving. And the conclusions they reached were fairly shocking, to say the least. Marijuana impairment, it turns out, was responsible. The indications are fall into three particular categories. One, people that happen to be under the influence or impaired by cannabis tended to drive more slowly than their counterparts that had used any other intoxicating substance. They actually tended to not tailgate, and they actually tended to subjectively know they were impaired, which is a very big difference between alcohol and cannabis. The subjective impairment, knowing you're impaired, is very different and contributes a lot to the statistics, which in fact bear out the statistic that if alcohol is involved with driving, there is a 4 times greater increase in the likelihood of an accident or a fatality. And so with that in mind, if you simply have cannabis or cannabis impairment, your risk of being involved in an accident or a fatality is no greater than if you had taken penicillin or night driving. The risk is no greater than simply taking penicillin. In fact, if you have 2 or more passengers in your car, your risk actually increases twice as much. So the relative risks involved in drinking and driving, or driving while impaired and under the influence of cannabis, are not the same. Alcohol is the problematic factor in that, and all the statistics bear that out, including the fatalities in the state. If I've taken up too much time, I know I'm past my 3 minutes. So would you like me to continue, or would you like me to hold off? I'm in support, yes, of both of these. With the neither of them have the DUID provisions in them, but I just wanted to let the committee know that DUID provisions are already taken care of in the current and existing system with driving under the influence of drugs under the current 21902. Thank you, Your Honor. I guess
Hello, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairwoman. My name is Benjamin Jacob Blumberg, and I hold a PhD from the Bloomberg School of Public Health up in Baltimore. And more importantly, I am here on behalf of the Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition. First off, thank you for your time. And I'd like to touch on support for both of these bills, something that Delegate Moon actually touched on. We deal primarily with public health interventions in the form of harm reduction related to the ongoing opioid and heroin epidemic across the country, but more importantly in Baltimore City itself. And if I am not mistaken, the governor just declared a state of emergency. And one of our biggest issues is that the vast majority of those that we provide services for and we give resources and tools to, these are mental health tools, these are social support tools so people can get a job again, are the most likely at risk of negative consequences should they be arrested for possession of marijuana. And decriminalization has been a great leap forward, but it hasn't been enough. And it takes so much effort on our part, and primarily from volunteers, unpaid effort to better these people's lives. And what ends up happening is that can all fall down and break apart in just a few moments, or maybe even a few seconds, either due to the smell of marijuana or otherwise. So on behalf of the ongoing fight against the opioid heroin epidemic as well, that's plagued both the city and the state, I strongly, and the Baltimore Harm Reduction Coalition strongly urges you to support both of these bills. And thank you very much for your time on this beautiful Tuesday evening.
I happen to just see if I could find any information about marijuana, smoking marijuana. So I happened to look at the American Lung Association, and it's on the American Lung Association on marijuana and smoke. And this is what they say. Smoke is harmful to lung health, whether from burning wood, tobacco, or marijuana. Toxins and carcinogens are released from the combination of materials. Smoke from marijuana combustion has been shown to contain many of the same toxins, irritants, and carcinogens as tobacco smoke. And they have that, what do I want to say? They have a footnote to that. Okay, I'm not going to go into that, but you can just look it up if you just look up marijuana. Beyond that, what's in the smoke alone, marijuana is typically smoked differently than tobacco. Marijuana smokers tend to inhale more deeply and hold their breath longer than cigarette smokers, which leads to a greater exposure per breath to the tar. Secondhand marijuana smoke contains many of the same toxins and carcinogens found in directly inhaled marijuana smoke. Anyway, the bottom line is okay, we've had this big anti-tobacco, reduce smoking tobacco to reduce lung cancer and other lung diseases. And so now we're saying, okay, let's legalize marijuana, and we don't have enough research on it, really, to say how really, really bad it is. And I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, that there's like 400 different toxins within marijuana. But anyway, this is your premier institution regarding lung research in the country. So what do you have to say to that?
What I'd have to say about that is sort of that science, this is the way science works, is that we make sort of leaps and bounds over the course of decades, potentially. And one of the things that's happened with drug prohibition is that, and you're right to an extent, that we don't know the implications of marijuana, let alone many other drugs themselves. What I would have to say about that is, although there may be certain carcinogens that have been identified in marijuana, there are complex biochemical mechanisms and biological mechanisms that occur in the brain and your human body that where even if someone is actually exposed to the same type of toxin, depending on what else they're exposed to, their lifestyle choices, their diet, etc., that can actually all impact the end result, whether that's cancer, whether that's lung disease, etc. And from my understanding, marijuana use actually can result perhaps in, maybe an increase in upper respiratory infection, etc. But it hasn't been shown as to the same levels as tobacco or nicotine, which actually itself isn't as carcinogenic as the 19 other chemicals that are in tobacco that are strongly carcinogenic.
So I'd like to also respond to this question, which is that there is not a higher incidence of lung cancer amongst cannabis smokers than there is amongst the general population. So those risks that you've listed with inhaling smoke, which as the statement you read does include like campfire and stuff, we're not criminalizing campfire just because of the possibility that it may increase the likelihood of lung cancer. You also spoke about the decrease in tobacco use that we've seen across the country, and we were able to successfully dramatically reduce the use of tobacco amongst the general population simply through education and providing accurate information rather than criminalization and stigmatization. So I think that would also be effective in educating people about the potential health risks associated with cannabis and allowing them to make that decision. Finally, as we know, 50% of Marylanders have tried cannabis at least once in their life. Something like 107 million Americans smoke cannabis. The only difference between the 8 states that have legalized and here in the state of Maryland is that they are able to know what other additives or chemicals are going into the substance they're using, because people are smoking cannabis here in Maryland already. We just want to make sure that they're doing so in a legal manner that doesn't risk criminalizing them, and also in a more informed manner so that they can be protected from the substances they don't want to be consuming.
Favor of the bill, come forward. If you're in favor of the bill. Yes. Who would like to start?
Hi, good evening. My name is Rachel Perry. I'm the Executive Director for Maryland Normal. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight in support of HB 1185 and HB 1236. We've had 80 years of prohibition and over 40 years of the war on drugs. Cannabis consumption is not going away, and it is time to accept this and create a safe, regulated market. I personally use cannabis. I use cannabis to manage the pain from my genetic disorder, and am tired of waiting on a failed medical program to roll out. In order to avoid regularly taking opioid painkillers, I'm forced to break the law. This is why I joined Maryland Normal. We represent over 5,000 citizens of Maryland who also want to see policy reformed. By creating a transparent and regulated marketplace, consumers will be able to have accurate information about product potency, similar to alcohol's ABV. The reforms proposed in HB 1185 and HB 1236 would achieve sensible public policy outcomes by emulating the best practices of other regulated cannabis markets. For these and other reasons you have heard today, I recommend giving HB 1185 and HB 1236 a favorable report. Yeah, no.
Yes, me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate your service. And oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. This is my first time here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and the members of the committee for seeing us. Thank you for your public service and for hearing my testimony today. My name is Adrian Matthews. I work in IT at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm a web developer of someguyinbaltimore.com. And I'm just some guy in Baltimore. I'm here as a citizen, as a taxpayer, as a victim. A victim not only of Detective Daniel Herschel, one of the 7 Baltimore police officers that were recently indicted, but also of the harsh police tactics that come along with the war on drugs. From the fabricated warrant that was used to get entry to my mom's house, retired Staff Sergeant Janice Matthews, to the time they stopped her in my block and shoved a nightstick in her mouth because the police thought she swallowed something. Or my friend Mike Mills, an Eagle Scout who was stopped, who was almost tased because he's never been stopped like that before, with guns drawn. I'm here representing those people, the people that couldn't be here today because they couldn't take off for work, because they didn't have $15 for parking, because they didn't have $200 for clothes. I'm here representing those people that are afraid to speak out to you guys because they'll be fired or ostracized in their communities. Last week, the chairman of the other committee asked what we could do to get past the litigious behavior of all the the 15 growers that have been awarded licenses. Well, I think what we can do is show these bills favorable support. It's an issue of liberty. It's the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to let the people decide. If you went to the same school, if you went to schools in America, you swore allegiance to the same flag that I did. Liberty and justice for all, for everybody. Not just 15 companies that are coming here from another state to do what we're still arresting people here for. That's not justice. That's not liberty, that we prohibit Maryland citizens from doing something in the privacy of their own homes. And if you guys can continue if we can continue this injustice, we ought to be ashamed of ourselves. So I urge the chairman, I urge the members of the committee, just to show these bills a favorable review and let us have liberty and justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Luke Jones. I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland, and I am on the Maryland Normal Board of Directors. And we're here today advocating for a rational, evidence-based public policy. The current public policy of the state of Maryland really is an unnecessary and inhumane and unjust public policy. We're seeing changes in public policy across the country, and we don't want Maryland to be left outside of this national conversation and the opportunity to participate in what is projected to become an industry larger than the NFL. And our citizens, our local businesses are ready to take advantage of this emerging economy and to make a change to our public policy. So we think that there really is very little compelling public interest in maintaining a criminal response to what for most Marylanders tend to be a passing phase in their life. So arresting our citizens who consume this plant is actually possibly the worst public policy response to the presence of cannabis in our society. And to sustain it really is not a rational public policy. So we have the entire West Coast now, which has moved to adult use. And it's time for Maryland to get a seat at the table and to participate. The regulatory structure that's been proposed for the state is comprehensive. It's state of practice. And we feel that it's ready to be passed. We certainly know that the citizens are ready for this policy change. And we'd love to field any questions with regard to the proposed legislation. And should the committee not be ready to pass that bill, we say it is time for the voters to be given a chance to weigh in. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, and members of the committee, thank you for your time. My name is Justin Streckel, and I'm with the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. I serve as political director and federal lobbyist. In respect for your time, I will keep my comments brief and just address the issue regarding home cultivation. And just focus on 2 points very quickly. One is the compelling state interest for a reason to prevent cannabis home cultivation. Should this committee and this state have the good judgment to legalize adult use marijuana, there would no longer be a compelling state interest in the criminalization of home cultivation. Just as the residents of this state have the ability to brew their own beer, mull their own wine, so should they be able to have the ability to grow their own marijuana. Secondly, as legislators, I know you are dealing with quite the issues with your budget, and just don't want to rest assured that you would not lose out on precious tax revenue should you allow home cultivation. 7 of the 8 states that have legalized marijuana nationwide have allowed for the home cultivation. The only one that did not is Washington, and currently, as we speak, they are hearing legislation which we expect to be passed to allow the citizens of Washington. And as my colleagues have mentioned, Colorado alone brought in $200 million a year. and I know that that's money that I'm sure that you would love to spend to better serve your constituents. I've also submitted testimony which has numerous citations for national studies that address the black market aspects of bringing this into a regulated market, the lower crime rates that we're seeing in the states that have legalized, the decrease in accessibility of marijuana by teens in the legal states, as well as a decrease in opioid abuse and deaths in states that have medical marijuana and states that have legalized marijuana, and an outline of the constitutional right for the lawmakers of this body to be able to make this decision. I leave you with a quote of Supreme Court Justice Brandeis, who famously opined that a state may, if its citizens choose, serve as a laboratory and try novel social and economic experience without risk to the rest of the country. Thank you. Oh, and I urge favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next? Come on up. Yes.
Who wants to go first?
You seem like a good kickoff.
Okay. My name is Barry Considine, and I'm here representing Barry Considine. I've been coming down here representing Barry Considine for 10 years. In 10 years, I've come down here and asked for the same thing over and over again. The right to grow my own medicine in the window of my apartment that faces has a nice southern exposure, and never have to go see a drug dealer again. When I first started coming down to Annapolis, somebody on this committee, the member I believe is gone now, asked me, Mr. Considine, where do you go to get your cannabis? And I said, well, until, I develop a friend that has a regular source, I go to motorcycle bars. I go to biker bars. I put on my jeans. I don't have on my suit and tie. I have on jeans and a flannel shirt, and I take my hair out of my ponytail, and it's not all greased back like I dressed to come to you guys. And I go and I talk to a stranger, and I was trying to buy marijuana. That was the situation before I got involved in this. Now, when I came down here in 2007, I was it. I was the only Maryland patient. The next year, it was 10 or 20. The next year, it was 50. Thursday, I sat in a hearing with over 300 witnesses on this issue. And you know what? 200 of them there were there to complain because they're not getting a fast enough return on their investment. Well, I've been making a personal investment of my body coming down to Annapolis in February and March and January to the code that you delegates know we can experience down here. I don't get paid by normal, MPP, ACLU, none of them. It's me, Barry Considine, coming here, testifying, telling you what I need to have a good quality of life. And I would love to answer any and all of your questions.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Overman. I am a self-employed Baltimore City resident, and I'm here in support of HB 1185. My family's always had a very different experience with cannabis than the average Maryland family. When I was 13 years old, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal colon cancer. And by the age of 17, I'd had enough of watching my mother suffer. That was the same year that Barry here came down to start talking y'all. And that was the year that I purchased cannabis illegally from my mother. The traditional medicine she was being given by the doctors wasn't helping with her side effects from chemo and radiation, so I took matters into my own hands and went ahead and tried to help my mother in the last few months of her life. After my mother passed away, my aunt, my uncle, my sister, and I began developing our new family dynamic. We wanted to figure out what kind of family we wanted. It was like, first time, people get to ask the kids what they want. And we decided we wanted honesty and open communication. We wanted a safe place to have elders who respected us and loved us. And a part of that conversation was immediately about adult use cannabis, since after all, I had purchased it for my mother. My aunt and uncle told me about their experiences with it. They asked me if I had used it. They asked us all questions. At that point, I had not. And they wanted us to be able to come to them anytime. So I was so excited by this. I went home and I shared it with my friends and their families, and they all looked at me with some distance. And of course, that's because it was taboo and it still is illegal. 3 months ago, I had the opportunity to spend some time with a Colorado family. This was my first time getting to experience a Colorado family, and it was a mother and father who were both incredibly successful, self-employed individuals with 3 children, now all over the age of 21. They told me that this family had began a discussion about cannabis and when it was proper to use it and when they'd be old enough to use it since their kids were little. They told me that their kids now all reasonably and responsibly used and are now all incredible contributing members to society, all very talented, and that they would rather their kids sit around a table and share a joint together than open up a couple bottles of wine. They felt it was less risky on their children's lives, and they always wanted to communicate about it with me and my experience with my mother's passing anytime I wanted to talk about it. My goal for Maryland is that we can start having these conversations with people who are not familiar with cannabis, who are not raised the same way that I was, and that these individuals can ask questions without feeling as if they might be doing something illegal, and that I can give answers, and that the friends that I have who smoke can give answers without being looked at with some sort of stigmatized glare. And I think HB 1185 is going to do that. So thank you.
My name is Justin Scoville. I represent the Green Party of Maryland, and I request your support for House Bill 1236. My written testimony lays out a case for the end of prohibition, and in particular, it discusses an aspect that Delegate Moon mentioned, which was the politicization of legalization of marijuana, especially by opioid manufacturers. But that's in my written statement, and in my oral statement, I would like to emphasize how this bill supports the values of the Green Party. The Green Party are advocates for sustainable governance systems which promote social, economic, and environmental justice, ending the current unsustainable prohibition of recreational marijuana that unduly harms minority communities and replacing it with state regulation and programs for drug rehabilitation is a part of the Green Party of Maryland's platform. We urge the committee to give a favorable report so that the people of Maryland can weigh in on this crucial issue. The Green Party places a great importance on the empowerment of the individual, whether in their workplace or in their local community. Direct democracy and allowing citizen input in public policy engages them with the political process, and the resulting policy decision is closer to the needs of the citizenry and is more legitimate in their eyes. Having this referendum would give Marylanders time to debate the merits of legalization, as well as the size and scope of regulation, and how specifically any raised funds would be used. The Green Party believes this referendum will improve public input for taxation and regulation policies in the future. One of the key provisions of this proposed bill and amendment is the right for Marylanders to cultivate up to 6 plants. The right to cultivate allows individuals to possess and consume marijuana outside of participating in the market. Home cultivation drives down the demand for an illegal market. It keeps prices low, it maintains a floor on retail market quality, and it ensures access for residents that may live in counties or municipalities with limited retail sale. It also allows the individual to control what they consume and encourages self-sufficiency. To conclude, the substance and process of this referendum supports the values of the Green Party, and I should also add its probable result as well. It was also mentioned by the chairman that the Goucher poll that was released last Monday showed 56% of Marylanders were in favor of legalization. They know how important this issue is, and this bill would give them the opportunity to show it in the 2018 election. We urge you to give a favorable report to House Bill 1236. The Green Party and I both thank you for your time.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Phil Alsop. I am a resident of Baltimore City, representing myself in District 46. I'm glad to be here to speak out in favor of both bills. And instead of rehashing the prevalent arguments that you've heard before, such as the potential tax revenue and preventing people from entering the criminal justice system, I would instead like to appeal to your sense of work ethic. We're all hard workers here in the room. We contribute to society. We pay taxes. Look at me. I am the same way. Except I aspire to be a cannabis cultivator as well. And if under the current system, if I or others were to pursue that aspiration, we would enter the criminal justice system, which is very bad. And so, every day we're learning about the medicinal qualities of cannabis, which is great, but cannabis is unique in that while it's medicinal, it is also its cultivation and the product itself is an art form, very similar to craft brewers and winemakers here in the state. And like art, there's an infinite number of possibilities to create something beautiful that provides value and satisfaction. And again, like art, that requires practice. And so I'm also very much in favor of the home cultivation for personal use in 1185. Governor Hogan likes to say that Maryland is open for business, but again, under the current system, that is only a partial truth. And so I strongly urge the committee to issue a favorable report so we can unleash the full economic potential of legal cannabis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Christine Miller. I act as a science advisor for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. And the first thing I guess I'll do is rebut some of the statements that have been made earlier about how great things are going in Colorado. First of all, the money that everyone thinks will come from these wonderful marijuana tax revenues for recreational use. There are budget shortfalls in Colorado this year. And I rather anticipate, once they figure out what's going on, it's going to come down to increased social costs. Their homelessness is way up. They have attracted homeless, both because of the hope that they can get jobs in the marijuana industry, which don't actually materialize for many people, but also because they want to use the drug. Law enforcement efforts are up in terms of drug law enforcement. In Denver, they're up, drug law violations are up over 50%. And that, all this costs, the other costs that I am quite familiar with, although Colorado doesn't have good data on this yet, is psychosis. I am a neuroscientist, and I devoted much of my academic career to studying causes of psychosis, and I can tell you that the literature is extremely strong that marijuana is one of them. And this is borne out by the recent National Academies of Sciences report that I have in my written testimony. Schizophrenia is one type of psychotic disorder. It's an extremely expensive disease, and you would expect, based on the most recent literature, that 1 out of 20 heavy users will develop this disorder. This may count as reefer madness, and I am here to tell you that that type of reefer madness is real, and there is real science on it. Now, it may not fit with what you see in some cheap made-for-TV movie, but it is real. So to conclude, I just want to say one more point. You heard about this Colorado family that this woman spent time with, and they are very open with their children smoking in the home. I spent time with another Colorado family. This woman testified in front of the Senate last week, and I would urge you to access her testimony. Her son became psychotic from marijuana use, tried to commit suicide. That's another factor that is linked with marijuana use in the National Academy of Sciences report. And she has been unable to get him to go through recovery in Colorado. It was recommended that she send him out of state because it is too difficult to get a teenager into recovery when you are in a state that is promoting the very drug that you want them to be free of. This will be a mistake for Maryland. It is a mistake to include another addicting substance. This is now the leading substance of abuse in teenagers in Colorado. more than any other drug, this is their leading problem treatment that they have to, deal with in addiction centers. This would be a real step backwards for Maryland, and I urge you not to support any of these bills. And I think particularly the ballot initiative bill is wrong because all this technical data, all the literature in that National Academies of Sciences report is not something that the general public knows. This is a perfect example of why we have a representative democracy. You people are capable of educating yourselves on a variety of topics clearly, and this is not information that is getting to the general public. Thank you.
Chairman Valeria, Madam Chair, Dumais, members of the House Judiciary, and Major Charles Hammy, the Prince George's County Police Department, on behalf of the Maryland Chiefs of Police and Sheriff's Association, would like to state our opposition to both House Bills 1185 and 1236 and ask the committee to return an unfavorable report on both of these bills. As we all know, both Colorado and Washington State legalized recreational marijuana, and I'm here to state that it's had a negative impact on public safety in several areas, including marijuana use by youths and both black market marijuana activity and diversion of marijuana to other states. Regarding youth marijuana use, it's widely accepted by the medical community that marijuana use is detrimental to young people. In April 2016, the American College of Pediatrics reported, quote, "Although increasing legislation of marijuana has contributed to the growing belief that marijuana is harmless, research documents the risk of its use by youth are grave. Marijuana is addicting, has adverse effects on adolescent brain, is a risk for both cardiovascular disease and testicular cancer, and is associated with both psychiatric illness and negative social outcomes," end quote. Since legalization in Colorado and Washington, they have both experienced sharp increases in marijuana use by youths aged 12 to 17. For example, the National Institute of Drug Abuse reports youth marijuana use has increased 20% in the 2-year average since Colorado legalized recreational marijuana. Past month, youth use of marijuana is 74% higher than the national average in 2013-2014. Colorado ranked number 1 in youth past use, up from number 4 in 2011 and 2012. Washington State moved from number 12 to number 6 since legalization. Just for a point of reference, Maryland is already at number 15. Diversion is a term used to describe moving a drug from a place where it's legal to a place where it's not legal. In this case, I'm talking about diversion of legal marijuana in Colorado to other states where it's not legal. We've interdicted marijuana products, both cannabis, edible marijuana products, vapes with cannabis in Prince George's County and in Maryland. Diversion of marijuana from Colorado has increased 325% since commercialization of medical marijuana and another 37% since legalization. And that's a very large landmass state surrounded by large landmass states. So it's easy to extrapolate the effect of diversion in a small landmass state like Maryland, surrounded by other small landmass states like Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. And the impact of that would be very high in this particular region. So members of the committee, let me close by saying that the legalization of marijuana presents a very real danger to the state of Maryland and the citizens here, to our youth, along with the risk to communities that occur from increased black market and diversion of marijuana. Those problems which are experienced today in Colorado and Washington can be avoided in Maryland simply by preventing legalization and returning an unfavorable report on House Bills 1185 and 1236. Thank you. We're number 15, yes, sir, according to the National Institute of Drug Abuse. We're number 15 for youth past use. So youth in this is defined as youths 12 to 17 in past month use. We're at number 15 now. Washington State was 12 and moved to 6, and Colorado is now number 1. They moved from 12 to number 6. They're at number 6 now since legalization. We're number 15 right now without legalized marijuana. So it's clear to see where it would end up.
Testify against the bill, come up, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Regina Cooper-Avarella. I'm the Public and Government Affairs Manager with AAA Mid-Atlantic. We at AAA Mid-Atlantic are extremely concerned about this legislation. We believe that before Maryland or any other state decides to pass a law to make it legal to possess recreational marijuana or to consume it, that we really need to take a collective pause and weigh all of the factors. We know that drug driving is certainly on the increase here in Maryland and nationally. According to the most recent national road survey conducted by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, nighttime drug use on weekends has increased by 25%, with marijuana showing the greatest spike at 48%. Here in Maryland, we know that our law enforcement officers are already wrestling with this issue. In 2015, Maryland drug recognition experts arrested 193 motorists and charged them with driving while impaired under marijuana. That actually doubled from 2012. There have been a number of studies on the effects of driving under the influence of drugs, several of which you'll hear more about from my colleagues. Unfortunately, most states are not fully equipped or prepared to deal with an increasing spike in drug driving. That's largely because there's no easy roadside tests for law enforcement to determine whether a driver is impaired by marijuana. And again, unlike alcohol, there's no, which can easily obviously be tested by blood alcohol content, no such test exists regarding marijuana or where it correlates with a driver's impairment level. As an advocate for the safety of motorists, AAA is troubled by the safety implications of someone smoking marijuana and then getting behind the wheel of a vehicle, as you can imagine. Also, there's really not sufficient data or information to provide to motorists as to what is a safe sort of guidance, safe usage of the drug to then get behind the wheel. Again, not unlike with alcohol. I'll wrap it up really quickly, sir. We know obviously that it's taken many years to change people's attitudes as it relates to drinking and driving. This committee we are grateful for has passed numerous legislation over the years strengthening Maryland's impaired driving laws, and for that we're grateful. But we believe that passage of either of these bills would certainly take us a step back, as you've already heard. And I'll just wrap up by saying that many are comparing this to legalizing casinos or as a way to generate tax revenues in our states. We certainly believe that legalizing marijuana would actually take us back, and any revenues generated would be offset by the other consequences that we would see. So we certainly urge an unfavorable report for both House Bill 1185 and House Bill 1236. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jake Nelson. I am here representing AAA, the national organization, and its 58 million members in North America. As an epidemiologist by training, my responsibility for AAA is to serve as an honest broker of data and research to inform our public policy. One thing I would like to do right off the bat is address the comments made earlier about the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration study released last year looking at the safety implications of using marijuana and getting behind the wheel. As an honest broker of data research, I have to tell you that that report had findings that were not statistically significant and therefore are inconclusive. It doesn't take much more than looking at national media headlines over the last few years to see other examples of misinformation being provided to consumers. One of the things that we have done at AAA is reviewed the published literature and also invested in research of our own to try to answer some of the remaining questions. Chief among those is what happens in a state when we look at fatal crash statistics that has legalized marijuana for recreational purposes. One of the only states that has data adequate enough to answer that question is Washington State, also one of the first two to legalize the drug for recreational purposes. In our study, what we found was that in the year after Washington State legalized the drug for fun, essentially, is that the number of drivers or the proportion of drivers who had recently used marijuana, gotten behind the wheel of a car, and then crashed, killing one or more people, more than doubled in that 1 year following the change in law. A vote to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes is a vote to increase injury and death on our roadways. Now, one of the most popular ways that lawmakers in states that have legalized marijuana for one purpose or another to try to manage the highway safety concerns is to pass per se laws. We did another state, Similar to alcohol, we did another research study looking at data from 9 states, drug recognition expert opinion data, to try to look for whether or not there was a reasonable per se limit that could be established for marijuana. What we found was that there is no concentration of this drug, active THC, or any of the other metabolites in marijuana that can be used to reliably predict impairment among drivers. That means that law enforcement officers, even with the perfect technology to measure accurately the concentration of the drug or the chemical in marijuana known to impair driving, even with perfect technology, that will do nothing more for us than show the presence of the drug. It is not an issue that can be managed the way that we manage alcohol impaired driving. For that reason, AAA, the national organization, strongly recommends this committee to render an unfavorable review of these 2 bills. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm John Townsend, Public and Government Affairs Manager for AAA Mid-Atlantic in Washington, D.C. As you know, the sponsor of this bill, which is 1185, says it's modeled after the bill in the District of Columbia, or the legislation in the District of Columbia. And so there are some things that we should be concerned about, gravely concerned. And that is the fact that the number of crashes involving drug driving is growing in the District of Columbia. And our fear is it would happen here in the state of Maryland. For example, we know that 42% of all fatal crashes in the state of Maryland are caused by persons who are impaired. In the District of Columbia, that number is 53%. And 1 out of 4 fatal crashes in the District of Columbia are caused by people under the influence, driving under the influence of drug. And that drug, by the way, is marijuana. In fact, historically, marijuana was the 2nd most commonly detected drug in fatal crashes in the District of Columbia. That was the case before the initiative was adopted and approved by voters in 2014, and that is the case now. In fact, 17.7% of all fatal crashes in the district, when they conduct a roadside sobriety test, they detect marijuana among the driver. And then in DUI stops, traffic stops by the district police, 1/3 of all persons who are stopped test both for marijuana and for alcohol. It is a growing problem in the district. In fact, as we said a moment ago, we expect this problem to continue to grow. And so for this reason, we don't want to see it happen here in the state of Maryland, which is where I live and have kids, and don't want to see this scourge continue. So we ask you to give this an unfavorable report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
To testify in opposition to that bill, come forward. If that concludes the hearing on that bill, Delegate Proctor, your bill is next. I think there's one